progress.
Jersey and so the whole.
I would like to call to order the Monday, November 25th, Addison School District Board meeting to order. As reaching a quorum, I see we have a quorum. First thing I'd like to do is introductions, and I'd like to start with Jason.
Jason Chance.
Laura Harvin.
Joanna Doria, Ellie Rom,
Steve Orzak.
Mary Heather Noble,
Chip Malcolm.
Wendy Baker.
Barbara Wilson.
Suzanne Buck.
Jamie McCallum. Brian Bauer.
Ellen Whelan Weist.
And staff and admin team that are in the,
Gail Leach, Director of Human Resources.
Courtney Cron, Director of Teaching and Learning.
thank you. And, oh, Tricia, I'm so sorry, thank you.
It's okay, Tricia Allen.
Okay, thank you. The next thing I'd like to do is, before we adopt the agenda, I would just kind of like to talk about our board meetings and our norms. And just as a reminder, and what I did is I included in the packet our ACSD meeting norms. And I think it's really important that we really focus on this a little bit. And my goal here is to really help each of us really become better board members, including myself, right? And so what I did is did a lot of reflection myself on how I could have handled the board meeting better last week as well. And so one of the things that I'd really like to emphasize is our norm that, we will invite and welcome contributions of every member and listen to each other with the emphasis on listening. And each of us is responsible for airing our disagreements during the meeting rather than carrying them outside the board meeting. But we'll operate in a respectful, collegial, and friendly atmosphere. We'll use humor as appropriate to help us work better. And then the other thing I did was really focusing on kind of Robert's Rules of Order, because that's one of our norms. And in refocusing on Robert's Rules of Order, some things that I think at times I allow us to get a little lax on is really our protocol. And in going back and listening to the board meeting, I saw that helped contribute to, I think, some of the back and forth, that kind of thing. So what I would like to do is really reinstitute my job of really keeping an orderly meeting and ensuring that everyone has a chance to speak. And first of all, though the chair is responsible for ensuring that a member's statement pertains to the business at hand, the chair needs to enable the individual to speak long enough to determine that. And there was a situation where I didn't do that. I just kind of assumed that it was basically not going to be related to the amendment that we were working on. And I was mistaken at our last meeting. When we were discussing the motion to amend, it is possible to amend a motion to amend, right? And I should have ensured that that wasn't the situation, okay? And so I apologize for that. And I will try to do better. The next thing is really kind of how meetings are being run. We agreed that we are going to follow Robert's rules. When we looked at a couple years ago, do we do a relaxed version of Robert's rules? We decided not to, except for we weren't going to make people, including myself, stand if you read Robert's Rules of Order, because that's kind of hard. So what I want to recommit to ensure that I do is that you must be recognized by the chair before you begin speaking, even during presentations. And I know that's awkward at times when you have a presenter up front and you just want to ask them a question, but before speaking, I just would appreciate that are acknowledged by me before I, before you start speaking. This way I can ensure that everyone's getting a fair opportunity to ask questions as well. And this, and as chair, I need to make sure this is followed consistently. If someone begins to interrupt another board member, I will state that they are out of order and explain why. I didn't explain why when I spoke, I just basically made a point of order, but it's important for me to explain why. And the reason why was because they were interrupting, right? And if someone begins to interrupt another board member, I will state that they are out of order and explain why, and that they will be given an opportunity to speak later after being recognized by the chair, okay? Unless you are asking a question to a presenter, you need to direct your comments to the chair after being recognized by the chair. So Robert's rules is fairly clear. You don't direct your question to each other, you direct it to Madam Chair. And it's not like, and we're trying to, so-and-so said this, blah, 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 blah. That's not how we do. You present what your view is, as opposed to presenting and rebutting necessarily what the individual said. They're entitled to what they have to say, right? And you're entitled to give your opinion as well, but not at the expense of the individual. Your comments should never include what you assume to be the person's motive. This applies to not only school board members, but also to our community at large. This is true in a board meeting as well as any of our committee meetings. When you disagree with another board member, you should never attack their position. Instead, speak to your own position or ask a question for clarification. When responding to a statement made by another board member, Robert's Rules gives a couple examples. Madam Chair, may I ask the member to explain, as one example. Or, Madam Chair, I hope the person who last spoke will think of the probable consequences, or something on that order. You can only speak for yourself. You cannot speak for the board as a whole, unless authorized to do so. Always remember that an individual board member's position is not the position of the board. Board members are entitled to their own views. If you want to express your own view in contrast to what was stated, then raise your hand, and once you are recognized by the chair, state your view and or position. If you at any time disagree with my call, you can request that is voted by the board members at the meeting by stating appeal, which needs to be seconded, and then it would be handled similar to us doing motions, right? And that can be overturned that way. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate that and remind us of that. And my goal is that we'll help each other and, to become better board members, okay? And so, we don't, none of us wants to be in the paper. I don't, right? And that's, I think that's enough. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So are we no longer operating under relaxed Robert's
We
rules?
never were.
Oh. I thought we had discussed that and decided as a board that we were going to
No.
relax some of the formal rules.
No, we haven't.
We never talked about it.
Other than
though?
the standing when you're speaking.
Right, the only time when I first became chair,
Yeah.
I put that in front of everyone. And at the time, what we agreed to was that we didn't have to stand. And so in order to do relaxed, right, and so we're just kind of above the threshold, right? That's the size of the board. 13 is larger than 12. They say 12 or less. But at any time, as a board, we can decide that we want to relax, some of the rules, right? But we have to then do that
As a
collectively and as a motion and agree to that at some point. And so that could be something we do at reorg, right? Each year or whatever, to take that up, right? So it is the formal rules. Go ahead.
Oh, can you do that in the middle of a meeting? can we move to relax Robert's rules for the purposes of, to have a more free-form discussion about things? I'm just thinking about the nature of the presentations and the content that we're gonna be engaging with over the next few months, and it would be nice to be able to have some respectful, but
Yeah,
more-
well, you can always, suspend the rules, right, and make a motion to do that, and then it needs to be, I believe it needs to be 2/3 of the majority, to agree to that. So it's definitely an option. Okay? And even in that case, I would, wanna make sure that we're giving everyone the opportunity to speak, and that, an individual, if we did relax, that, everyone is giving their fair share, and not one or two people dominating the conversation. So I'd be watching for that anyway, and the relax. Okay, any other questions? Thank you for, listening, and I'll try to do my best, and, at any time, if you think, oh, she missed something, please, say out of order or whatever, and, I appreciate that, right? Because it's, sometimes you're focused on, all the dynamics going around, and you can definitely, I can anyway, miss something I should have done. Okay, so next, what I would like to do is, have a motion, to adopt our agenda.
I'll move, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Okay, and a second?
I actually have to say the motion first.
Oh,
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as printed.
second.
Okay, any discussion? We'll get this, guys, I know sometimes but humor is good. I see no discussion, then, the agenda is adopted as written. Thank you. The next, agenda item on our agenda is our first public comment period. And, I just wanna reiterate what is included within the agenda is that public comments are encouraged and welcomed at each regular board meeting during the period designated for public comment, which this is the first one. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, and citizens will be called to make their statement by the board chair. So you have to be acknowledged by myself. And as a reminder, the public comment period is not designed to be a discussion rather than an opportunity for board members to listen to constituents. Public comments regarding personnel, students, or legal matters will not be heard by the board. Okay? So, are there any public comments? Anyone that would like to make a public comment in the room? Okay. Anyone on Zoom that would like to make a public comment, please indicate by raising your Zoom hand. Okay, seeing none. Whoops. Molly Withers, okay. Withers, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Molly.
Hi. I'm in Milton, otherwise I'd be there in person. Let me see if you can see me. I guess you can't really see me anyway, right?
No.
Okay, but you can hear me.
Yep.
I'm coming on to voice my appreciation for all of the work you all are doing. I sort of personally know how hard it is, and I've listened in carefully to the last 2 policy meetings, and I just really appreciate the amount of deep thinking that you all are doing about sort of the future of our district. And I'm here to encourage you to consider sort of a temporary amendment to C30 or an amendment to C30 to relax some of the guidelines by which a student might attend another school. And in doing that, perhaps we can get a sense of the appetite within our district for school choice in this coming year, and it might in fact be a short-term solution for next year, buying us time to come up with longer-term solutions without emptying schools out. So just as I listen to the board meeting, to the policy committee meetings, and understand how deeply you're looking at C30 and D6, I encourage you to consider that simple change, and perhaps Dr. Baker is going to speak to maybe inquiring of our community their depth of interest around having some potential for school choice in the coming year. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else that's on Zoom that would like to make a public comment, or in the room as well? Pausing here. Seeing none, then we'll move on to the recommendation to approve the minutes of the November 9th and the November 11th board meetings. May I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Thank you, Jamie. Any discussion on either sets of minutes? Okay, seeing none, then the board minutes for November 9th and November 11th are approved as submitted. Thank you. Next, we have approving the ACSD bills, and I'm going to turn that over to Chip.
A group of bills were read today by Jason and myself. The general fund warrant was for $985,719.02. There were two payroll warrants, one for $801,502.32, and a second payroll warrant for $302,986.67. There were no problems that I saw or Jason saw, so I guess I would move that we accept the bills as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, then the bills are approved as reported by Chip. Thank you. The next agenda item was report of our student representatives who are not here tonight. Nava did send me an email earlier this morning saying that she wouldn't be here. So we will move on to the report of the superintendent. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Baker.
Thank you. The first item are the personnel appointments and resignations. Typically, you like to read those into the record. One of note is Kristen Kara, who is replacing Izzy at MUMS as the health teacher, just so that you know that that position is covered. We are also appointing Ethan Miller as a building-based substitute. This is a strategy that's been used in the district before. We know we have a shortage, and at MUMS, getting that stability there just seemed like the right thing to do at this point. So he will be taking up that position in MUMS, which is a budget-neutral approach, given the fact that we haven't been able to fill substitute roles. So those are just kind of two of interest.
Okay, can I have a
I do have a question.
let's make a motion first, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll move to appoint Jocelyn Bushy, paraprofessional 1.0, Kristen Cara, health teacher 1.0, Brendan Collins, assistant boys hockey coach, Ethan Miller, building-based substitute 1.0, Laura Murphy McIntosh, assistant Nordic ski coach.
Can I have a second?
A second.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to open it up to discussion, questions, and Steve.
I have worked in districts where building-based substitutes are a rather normal thing. Is there any way we can expand that beyond MUHS? Because I think all of the elementary schools have a problem with substitutes, and I think they all could use a building-based substitute because there is a need, and it is a much more attractive position than your typical substitute. So I think there is some appetite to fund that. Yeah. And in the long run, although it is hiring a person permanently, it does save a lot of money because, well, may not save money necessarily, you said budget neutral, it saves a lot of stress
Yes.
on staff, because, when there aren't enough substitutes, there's a lot of coverage that goes around and things like that. So having that one person in the building, and as has been pointed out, when the kids know that that person is there, they don't have to say, oh, you're the substitute. It's like, you develop a relationship with those kids, which is also a good thing. So I would encourage the administration to look at expanding that just beyond this single appointment. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions pertaining to the appointments or comments? If not, then the appointments are approved as read by Suzanne. I'm not gonna read them again.
So I just have three other items to update you on briefly, and then as per your request, there's an opportunity for some discussion relative to the PICUS report. I think you all had some homework around that. So the three items for update include the paraeducator vacancies and substitute availability. That's just making sure that you're understanding that, you know, it still is a very, very tight. I mean, we're not functioning at the same substitute level that we have even right after COVID, which is, you know, that's remarkable. So we're working our way through that. There are approximately 12 paraeducator vacancies at Mary Hogan, 4 at Mums. You know, I mean, we have them around the district still, and we just, despite having hiring referral bonuses and, you know, kind of a number of other options and really an exceptional compensation contract, it's difficult to recruit people into those positions. The vacancies we have now are general ed vacancies, because students who have specialized needs are able to get the support that they need. We've reallocated folks who were serving in a general ed position into more intensive needs positions as those have come up. So this is an ongoing challenge for the district, as I understand it, and we're not out of that challenge. So, you know, the schools have done a wonderful job of taking different approaches. We are also looking at hiring potentially another K-6 teacher as an on-team teacher at Mary Hogan that would work with potentially, say, the 4th grade and the 1st grade to try to make the instructional needs fit together the way that they would have had the paraeducators been able to be hired. We've also got a swanky new part-time position called a community assistant that is just, you know, we're thinking people who might want to come into the school for a couple of hours, you know, to help with lunchtime supervision or morning things, or, you know, just to provide just some glue, you know, and mortar as the day moves along. So the thought being that as a part-time, that might be just something that is of interest to someone who maybe they drive a bus and they'd like to stay for a few hours, or they have some time in the middle of the day and they would like to come and work, in that way they would be our employees, of course, and go through the proper training relative to those things. So
Question.
so we're working through every creative solution we can, you know, and I just wanted to make sure that the board just kept apprised that we're in that circumstance.
Okay, questions?
Yes.
Brian?
Maybe you know what I'm gonna ask. Was that directed towards me? No.
No.
Oh, okay. I said,
No.
I've tried that, but maybe I will go in at some point and help out.
Yeah, and the thought, I think, is that there are a number of community members that might be interested in doing that if it were a couple of hours or something of that
Exactly.
nature. So.
Yep.
So the second item is just an update on the discussions that I've been having with members of the Ripton community. I think I last let you know that I was invited to attend really a wonderful meeting in the Ripton community with, I think there were over 50 members of the community present, and we just talked about the realities of the enrollment that they're facing for next year and projected to the year after, as well as right around 28 students the the challenges with that, in terms of meeting the class size requirements in any grade configuration that made anyone happy. And we had a really wonderful discussion about lots of different things that the community has thought about over time, and that sort of might be some possibilities as we move along. From that big meeting, they requested emails from folks who were interested in getting together and talking more, and I understand from the leaders I met with last week that they had approximately 15 people who came forward for another discussion. That discussion was reported out to me Wednesday, when I had 3 community leaders come and just kind of apprise me as to where things are. Understanding that that dropping enrollment that low is concerning, and one of the things that we talked about that I would just like to put out for the board to perhaps think about and maybe discuss, if you'd like to, at an upcoming meeting is the possibility of surveying the Ripton parent community to determine where they're feeling relative to enrolling their student in a school that small. If we meet the class sizes, we are looking at probably a K1, 2, 3, or kind of a K1, 2 of 6, right? I mean, they're exceptionally small class sizes. And it's a much smaller school community in that respect. So they suggested that it might be prudent to just check in with the parents of Ripton students, as well as Molly mentioned, just parents of other students who may be interested in coming up to the Ripton school, even if it's next year as a transitional year, if the board is thinking about doing something a little bit different for the 2026-27 school year. So that's kind of where they were, understanding that this is a very challenging situation and interested to know more about those 2 things. And so that's where we are, and if that's something that you would want to take up for discussion at a future time, I'm certainly happy to gather that information if that's of help to the board.
Any questions before we continue on at this point?
I guess I'm
Mary Heather?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the request correctly. So the request is to survey both Ripton families about their sense of sort of this predicament or the circumstances the school's facing, and also survey the rest of ACSD families to see if there are folks who want their kids to go there. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think that, I would hate to speak for them particularly, right? But what I understood in from our conversation, what I took away was if there's a possibility, as the policy committee meetings, have kind of been rolling, in their thinking, if there's a possibility that the board is going to consider more substantive changes, say in 2026-27, then making sure that we have crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's before thinking about possibly making a change to the education of students in Ripton, if we feel that there are too few students there for the year, that would be something that would be important to the community, just so that we're not bouncing kids around a lot, if necessary, and so that we have a sense of kind of where things are before making decisions. And I think we learned from our time in talking about this issue in September that there's some parents that are worried about having their kids in grades with multiple curricular pieces and so on and so forth. And so I think this is the proactive end of that, where we might be thinking about what are people thinking now, so that we have an idea of how people might respond to how we proceed. The homeschool students, there's 70 6 of them in Addison Central right now. I don't know how many of them off the top of my head are in grades K through 5, but I don't know the last time anyone has talked with them about whether they might be interested in being in an Addison Central school. But for example, that might be another population just to check in with, perhaps to prevent a change to the students in Ripton that is motivated by a kind of a substantial drop in enrollment right now, prior to yet then a different change that happens the year after that, if that is the board's wish, as you work your way through things. So I think it was a matter of prudence, just trying to make sure we understand everything. And also, if a number of families are thinking they'd really like their students to have a different type of an experience, it's helpful for them to be able to articulate that. And those things are hard to articulate when you're in a small community, right, where this is a difficult issue. So doing so, more from a district survey might be helpful.
Chip?
Yeah, I mean, this strikes me, we've talked, forever on this type of issue, educational, financial, facility, all those kinds of things which have gone into it. This seems to be purely an educational
Yes.
and greater social. It's not an issue that comes up just because of money. It doesn't come up because of transportation. It doesn't come up because of everything else. It's purely that type of issue for the parents, of whoever kids would go to Ripton School, either in Ripton or somebody from somewhere else, including the homeschool kids, yeah. So I think it's very important to gather that kind of educational concern both ways, because it's one of the pieces.
Joanna?
Yeah, I would totally agree with Chip. My impression of that meeting is there were a lot of people, like 15 people came to the table with a lot of anecdotal evidence, a lot of conversations around the community that included from varying perspectives. So it's trying to reconcile those anecdotal evidence with what's actually real. I appreciate you bring up the homeschool piece too. That's something that I don't think comes to the surface in terms of awareness. And I just want to, some perspective is like moving an entire school to another school seems really drastic, and in order to meet the D6 policy, if parents' concerns, because they're real, that the concerns are real, could be addressed with not as drastic of a move. If there is a choice that would actually alleviate and make some families happier, it just seems like it's just sort of due diligence. But I understand that the policy committee is grappling with that too, and it's not neat and tidy, like having,
Okay, Ellen, and then Suzanne.
I was gonna say, I think the policy committee has heard a different version of, I think, a similar concern / request of really understanding more community input before making big decisions, which is, I think any of us would agree that that's essential in moving forward with big decisions, whether it be for one school or for the whole district. And I think from my perspective, some of that concern rightfully comes from watching a group of 4 of us, right, or 5 of us in a room really throw ideas at the wall and start to pick up speed around those ideas, but not because we're saying this is definitively the thing, but it understandably sounds like that when you're paying attention to the meetings. So on the piece of surveying families, I think that's a great idea. I'll just say I think surveys are losing their power. And so I worry that a survey is one tool to try to get that feedback, but it's becoming less and less effective, and our survey responses are pretty low. So we would need, and I don't think that's unique to us by any stretch. People are not reading email as much. There are all kinds of things. So we have to be aware of the fact that that's maybe a really good step, and also one that's not going to get us as much information as we might want. And I think we're unfortunately on a couple of different time tracks for decision making. One is sort of immediately focused on an acute situation at Ripton, but it's not Ripton alone that our whole district is grappling with. And so and the policy committee, we've been talking a lot about how do you make certain decisions more immediately, or recommendations or accommodations, and then how do you also sort of set up for process around bigger conversations. So I just want to throw that out there. I think personally a survey is a great idea. I don't know how much we'll get from it. to give us the information we want, but I don't think that means it's the only thing we can do for the district-wide conversations. And yet I don't know if we have the time to do as much for just immediately addressing next year.
Thank you. Suzanne?
I think well, for starters, I would really love to, if we're thinking about moving students, allowing the entire district the opportunity to say, my kid goes here, I'd like to be able to send them here, but that also then brings up the transportation piece, which I'm not sure we're ready or can address by next year. The other piece that's coming down the pike, and probably faster than any of us can keep up with, is whatever the legislators decide over the spring semester. And they could very well, on their docket is class sizes, school sizes, so they could very well be making decisions before the year ends.
Jamie?
I love this discussion. That I did not know I knew there was a Ripton meeting, but I had never heard anything from it. And the things you're saying that happened there were, and actually the thing that Molly said earlier, who I believe is from Ripton, is that true? I don't know her, but are things that conclusions that I sort of been ruminating with the last couple of days actually as well. And what you just said about whole district, blah blah blah. So the surveys thing that Ellen's bringing up. I personally, I love surveys. I'm like a survey guy. I think they're cool. And but I agree. Like some sort of mechanism to survey, even if it's not an actual survey, but get a sense of what's going on with families. Maybe we do an immediate thing, but also a long-term picture of what people feel about certain questions that actually would be really relevant to the stuff the policy committee is doing, especially around C30 and D6, would be great. Would be an amazing addition to our decision-making stuff that we go through. So I'll just second the emotions of people saying that tonight.
Any other? Go ahead, Steve.
Along with the concerns about surveys is who takes the surveys, because we don't always get an accurate picture of all the people in the district, and people that are affected by many things like poverty and are often the ones that are not represented in those surveys. So I have concerns about that, which I have expressed. I also have concerns about the narrative that seems to be out there that school choice is some sort of magic bullet. And it's not. There's so many problems with it, including the equity issue. What happens when the rich people in the district gravitate towards a rich school? Is that really solving a problem, or are we going against the equity model that we're trying to create? So, I've raised these concerns in the policy committee. I've raised these concerns in the board, and I would hope that we keep them in mind when we go forward, that it's not just the people that show up and talk or fill out surveys. We're responsible for the education of all the students in the district, including those that don't generally have a voice.
Any other thoughts, comments? So just to kind of recap, it sounds like there is interest in putting this on the agenda for further discussion. Is that what yeah. And so I would think that part of that would be maybe a little more framework of, maybe this shorter term, and then we can also talk about longer term. But, the one issue we have right now is that we're in a budget development cycle, right? And so there's immediate issues that we need to deal with, and potentially we can then decide, well, do we want to do something that's not maybe as robust as what we could do and should do in the future on the short term. And so is that something that everyone would like us to try to work into an agenda as we plan out maybe the next one if we can?
Yes.
Okay. Mary Heather, did you have a
just want to
question?
clarify, just for my own notes. So for further discussion, are you focusing the discussion or the agenda item on the question regarding next year specifically?
I think we need to.
Okay. Thank you.
Cause I really am concerned about, you
Yeah.
know, how long this is gonna take and the influence that it has on the budget. And I don't in any means think we need to ignore the longer term. I think that's equally important as well. Is that, okay, cool.
Okay. So the last item before we have a discussion on the PICUS report is just an update on where we are with equity-based budgeting. I can begin that by saying that, you know, our district office welcomed Emerson Francis Corrente to our office as the tiniest member of the ACSD team. Matt and his family are very excited to welcome him, and he looks like a love. So all is well on that front, and Matt and I have been traveling around the district meeting with principals as they are developing their plans and looking at student data with their faculties and determining what they feel they need. Some of the language in the PICUS report around core teaching and others we're using and developing in order to be able to talk with each other about sort of how we're structuring our educational delivery model, and those conversations have been fruitful and they're going well. All of the principals' plans are due after Thanksgiving break, so that feels good, and the finance committee will hopefully find a time to meet toward the end of next week, so that we can begin to share some thinking around how we're going to be able to meet the feasibility target. So we have those two things working simultaneously from either ends, and that's going well. Matt and I put together a number of different options if we were to need to cut our budget, in conversations that for us began in August, so that work is, I just want to assure the board that work was kind of well underway, in that, we have a number of different spreadsheets and data and information to choose from to be able to do the appropriate thinking. That's just really an update for you, so that you know that we're continuing to make our good progress, and I'm excited to see how it all comes together.
And the goal is for the next board meeting to be on the agenda with.
So I think, that depends on the advice the finance committee gives us. If we can meet toward the end of next week, we'll begin to share some of our thinking about the trimming that we'll need to do. And we'll have that as a conversation point. I think the meeting, if the finance committee recommends, that we bring that information to the meeting on the 9th, I think it is, then we will. And then the meeting on the 16th, I think, is related to tax rates. We should have the yield and the long-term weighted average daily membership numbers for us, by that time, hopefully. So, right, we're gonna go with that, and so that we would be able to kind of give the board a sense as to what we're beginning to understand at this stage of the process relative to how our budget impacts the tax rates of our taxpayers. And then spending plans, the triangles are due after break. We will be sorting that out and probably creating a tool related to Matt's stacks that show each of the schools and how things work out with operations and so on and so forth, right up to the equity pieces, so that we should, on the first meeting in January, if the finance committee feels we're ready, present a first draft of a spending plan to you at that point. So it's not just what will we do without, but what will we do with what we have in hopes. That's kind of the general thinking.
Go ahead, Chip.
I don't wanna get into scheduling particularly, but because it's crucial timing wise and because of Matt's absence, and we can't warn anything before Wednesday the 4th or Thursday the 5th. I just bring it up at this point as to the finance committee, there's nobody in the office to warn the meeting.
But weren't we gonna meet on the 9th?
we had a meeting scheduled, that's part of my question, okay, is that if we have a meeting scheduled for the 9th,
It's the morning of the board meeting.
that's the morning of the board meeting, but it would be before the board meeting.
True.
So,
So we can do that. It's basically
no,
Friday.
but I meant,
Yeah.
this is crucial timing wise, all right, which is important, but I just think we need to, since we're all here.
So can I recommend that maybe at the conclusion of the meeting that you guys caucus and
Yeah,
compare your
that,
calendars?
I just don't want people to leave, so we do it, because, I don't wanna get caught in chasing everybody around, since everybody leaves after this to go somewhere, if
Yeah.
not to their home. No, but I meant, it's Thanksgiving week, so superintendent's gonna be here, so, alright. The four members, please attack us so we can do it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Sorry
you.
to interject that.
Thank you.
I
No,
have
go ahead.
no further report about that, yes. Yep.
Okay. Ficus.
So, this item is on here just based on the board's desire to have some time to talk about the report. I think, Barb added chapter 3 into the board pack, just in case, I had sent it to you as a whole document, for those who wanted to read all 133 pages. We are, we can certainly discuss any aspect of it that you'd like, but it's just time to have it on, as an agenda item for discussion.
Ellen?
I have a question that I don't know if it's answerable, but Wendy, I'm asking because you're so much more plugged into how this report and other conversations are evolving in Montpelier. I attended, before the election, there was a meeting in Cornwall that Senators Ruth Hardy and Chris Bray and then Representative Peter Conlon attended, and the Picus report came up there. And something that Peter Conlon mentioned that I had seen in the news coverage was how many of the recommendations or the metrics that are used in this report sort of have no bearing on reality in Vermont. I think that's an editorialized version of but essentially that a lot of the numbers and the scales in what this consulting organization provided just sort of translates poorly. And when I was reading through, I haven't read all of this to be fair, but when I was reading through this, the pieces that jumped out at me were things like that they were creating kind of model school districts, assuming district populations, student populations of 3,900, and things like that for us would mean combining 3 different districts, I think, almost to get to. So I was wondering to what extent, I've had a hard time reconciling this report with reality / directions of where the conversations are going, because, and I think it's because I've not read all 133 pages or even these 25 really in depth, but can you say more about how people are taking this and grounding it in reality in Vermont, or what kind of influence it's having, given that it is sort of existing in a place of theory more than function?
Yeah, a little bit, and I can also talk about the way in which the reports come up in our conversations in Addison Central too, if that's helpful. So I think one of the things that you'll hear, if for any of you that are able to attend any of the commission on the Future Vermont Education meeting, just a reminder that they meet in Middlebury on December 2nd. The public portion of that meeting is here at 5:30, it goes till 7. And then the meeting itself is at the Career Center from 1 to 4. So those are obviously open, and that's where many of these conversations right now are taking place in preparation for the legislative session. So one of the things you'll hear from them is really a focus on class size, and I think that is probably the most likely thing I would say to be a focus of the legislative session, because there are ways in which we can increase class size without incurring capital expense, and that obviously is something that is helpful to ensuring that we're as fiscally responsible as we can be. So this report talks about the benefits of class sizes at approximately 15, and how there are academic benefits of class sizes that are around 15. Now, mind you, it's 15 instead of 30, right? So most of the country has a different problem from the one that we're facing. But in the grades K1, 2, 3, in this report specifically, they talk about research that shows a positive effect in class sizes of 15. Across our superintendent's region, I think 15 to 17 is something that we're all thinking about and trying to support students to be able to learn in classes that are approximately that size for lots of reasons. This report was largely quotes research developed by economists. So there's very little grounding in actual student achievement. It does rely heavily on tutors as a school improvement strategy, which is an effective school improvement strategy. So after school tutors, you probably saw that if you got that bar. Extended school day, extended school year, things of that nature, and that is an effective strategy that used to be in a number of federal grants, for example, and one that we don't really utilize well here at all, that I think would be worth our consideration for future years. I think Courtney's working on some projects right now that may bear fruit and give us an opportunity to make some headway there in the coming year. That is a more cost-effective strategy, for example, than our academic interventionist strategies, where we're hiring a full-time person, and so it's more cost-effective, and it actually leads very positively to student results. So that's an example of good work that is highlighted from this report that we could be thinking about. I think. One of the strategies that I usually use when I read a report like this is I just go to what are the articles that they're quoting, what are they saying, and what does that all look like, and so I would recommend that you do that if you'd like to do that, and just kind of understand more about what's behind them. This report is really largely about efficiency, and it doesn't take into consideration capital improvement costs, which in Vermont obviously would be substantial, since I don't have 2 elementary schools where I could put 400 kids, in that
Or
sense.
transportation, right?
So the other thing is that I would say is that there's a difference between rural studies that this report draws upon and urban studies. Rural studies have the transportation component to it, and so that has to be figured in as a mitigating element, whereas urban studies, that's not typically as much of a challenge. So I think we are trying to find the pieces in here that we can pull up, mostly as Chip mentioned earlier, to be to give us better windows into educational quality strategies that we can be pulling together that are within our sphere of control, in that sense, and letting the legislature think about the rest, which I believe will center most directly around class size.
Brian, did you have a question?
Yes,
comment?
and a statement as well.
Okay.
So who do I address?
You can address it to me, or what?
I will do that then. I had an opportunity to read a lot of that report. I skimmed over parts of it, okay? And they were up front when they said that their model does not exactly fit. Now, that does not mean that you toss it out and say none of it works, and this is what you were talking to, Wendy, that you have to pull out what is going to work for us. The other thing is that I believe we don't use history enough, and I guess what I would recommend or suggest is that there was another report done in 2016 by these same folks. They had left out 4 different categories of things on purpose, and they stated what they were. And I'm wondering whether it'd be worthwhile going back to that report as well to see whether other things could be utilized from it, and also to compare some differences between what they're saying in 2016 and 2024, how things have changed. So yes, I did read it.
Thank you, Steve. Brian. Steve.
I did read it. When you said it was done by economists, that makes sense because I have a minor in economics, so I'm reading it, it's going, oh, this is great, you know. So I enjoyed reading it actually. Although they does make specific recommendations, and then they do put the caveat in there that this doesn't really apply to Vermont because
Yeah.
we're just so small. But when you look at the numbers that they're putting in there, yes, of course, we don't have a 400 student elementary school, which is the bottom range of what they say is the most efficient and optimal. We don't have a school that fits in there, and many of the schools that we have fall below or are approaching only 10% of that. You know, so when they're saying 400 students, when we've got a school that's pushing 30 right now, that should make some difference about talking about efficiency and about class size. They do recommend optimal class sizes, and I know economists have reputations like lawyers and politicians, like everybody's like, oh, these guys are evil. They're not just looking at the fiscal impacts here. They're also looking at the several places in here they mention the idea of class sizes and efficacy with students, and talking about having class sizes of this nature that increase student test scores, grades, especially the reason that they focused on K through 2 was because those have the highest effect. And the longer that those class sizes are maintained and those school sizes are maintained, the better effect it has in following years. So if these are appropriately sized classes compared to the control groups, that they did follow them academically and did do some progression and succession studies to say, and those gains continued for the rest of their academic career. So I understand that economists, everybody says, oh, well, they're talking about the money. They do talk about other things in here as well. So I suggest that you might look at that with that lens too. I don't, I'm not as quick to dismiss this as other people are, because you're right, they are dealing with an ideal situation, but they're also looking at actual studies that are taking place in actual schools. So it's not like they're making this stuff up. It make it sounds like this is a thought experiment. It's not really. I mean, they're studying schools in Tennessee, and I think Rochester was another one. So these studies are not just looking at the impact of the economics, they're also looking at the academics. So I think we ignore this report at our peril, and I think that the legislature, although they are going to have all kinds of caveats and say, this doesn't all apply to us, that they are going to look at this very seriously. I mean, we hear all kinds of things saying that we're going to make data-driven decisions, that we are going to use research-based evidence to make these decisions. Here it is, folks. Here's a lot of evidence. Here's a lot of research here. And I think this points a good direction. And when we talk about anecdotal evidence, of course, that's a problem. When we throw out statements in board meetings that say things like, closing schools has never saved money, that's simply not true. I would rather see actual data. This is data. I have some data that we could talk about at another time about the closing of the Addison School that actually did save that district a considerable amount of money. And that comes directly from the superintendent and the business manager in those areas. So, okay, we can say we don't like what it says, but I think that we have to pay attention to this because this is research-based. So that's all I'm going to say.
There are a couple of other points I'd like to bring to your attention. One of them is in the section around instructional coaches. The recommendation is 1 per every 200 students. That would mean 8 for us. That would make a big difference. That's a very well understood school improvement strategy. I know in Vermont sometimes we think we need providers, as you know, that the answer is in more people who are working with students. Right. But in fact, having people who are assisting those who are working with students to work at their best is a very research driven strategy. And so that's an area where we don't have 8 instructional coaches. And that would be a departure from the way we probably have thought about that here over time. I know that's been an important, that team's been an important team in place, but it's been one that has been discussed over time, right? In terms of is that the best investment? And this report definitely supports that. It suggests putting efforts into Tier 1 instruction, which is one of our strategies for our priorities for our budget coming up. And the other thing it highlights is the importance of licensed teachers, licensed, well-trained teachers. In fact, there's a specific part of the report that debunks the idea that that the classroom assistants are what makes the difference in the student achievement. It is our licensed teachers that actually have the research behind them as making the difference when they're able to be providing the instruction for students. That's a concern for us, in that our students of highest needs are spending the majority of their time without licensed teachers. I mean, that's a systemic challenge that is not just in our school district. It's something that we're thinking about across the state. So that's a report in here that I think is interesting. And the last thing, one of the abstracts that I pulled from one of the reports that they're thinking about, that they talk about in the beginning, it's like, here's an example of a sentence that's important. The findings from production function studies of schools, so are they producing learners that are achieving more, are less consistent, but there is some evidence that moderately sized elementary schools, 300 to 500 students, and high schools, 600 to 900 students, may optimally balance economies of size with the potential negative effects of large schools. So to me, the presence of some and may provide some caution, right? And also, it's one of the sources that they're drawing upon is saying that the goal is to mitigate the potential negative effects of large schools. So that's why I always go, what are the sources, that they're quoting in the research, and what is that really focused on and looking at, just as a way of grounding our discussion into what's real, because there are some wonderful things for us to be thinking about in this report. And there are also some conclusions that are maybe given less attention that it's important we don't miss.
And speaking of coaches, I know that prior to the pandemic, we did have a math coach, Jessica Lynch, who's someone I know personally. And when I went back and looked at the data, our results were actually ticking up, right? And so it really did make a big difference, I think, having that, someone that really understands the math and is able to really help our teachers, who may not be math people, understand it in a way that they can better teach it. So I think that's amazing kind of approach as well.
It's difficult. I'm sorry, Mary Heather. It's difficult in the state of Vermont because, it's hard to have a full-time need for this and a full-time need for that. When we're all not quite the right size. That is where larger district consolidation can be helpful. In that sense, in terms of district office is what I'm talking about now. In Vermont, the strategy used to be that the Agency of Ed held consultants in the content areas, and then those consultants visited schools, started programs, brought other resources into the state. It appears that's not where we are right now in terms of the Agency of Ed and holding those resources, and so that's a challenge, that we face as a state, because we've got to rebuild some of those things. And it's costly, for everyone to be doing that on their own, certainly. I'm sorry, I interrupted Mary.
I had just a quick question. The sentence that you read aloud, can you just ground that on page number for me?
Yes. there's the abstract. And it's mentioned right in the beginning, in the introduction where it talks about the, the research that essentially grounds the evidence-based model. The researchers that do that, let's see, well, the authors are there. That's one of the 3 studies that they mention. While someone else is talking, I'll find it.
I think, yeah,
Oh yeah, here it is right here, page 14.
Thank you.
Yep.
yeah, and at this point, I think it's important for us just to move on, but thank you so much for helping us, with the study. And it is something that I know I have been trying to read, some of the commission work that's available. The School Board Association, has been providing us links of their works, and this report is coming up, in their work. It's definitely coming up in their work. Okay, next up is report of the chair, and this isn't, a long item by any means. I included in your packet the charts that were used for the educational quality standards adoption, which needs to be adopted by July 2025. And in particular, if you look at slide 25, it really focuses and zeroes in on school board responsibilities in this. And I did take the webinar back, now it's 2 weeks ago, and I did on Friday pass along the webinar so folks could listen. I would recommend that you do. I think, the good news was that the work that we are engaged in is really in line. We have our strategic plan for equity. We are doing equity-based budgeting, right? So we're getting our toes wet, so to speak. We have a lot to learn. But the work, it really, I think, to me, really emphasizes the importance of the work that we are doing and, our policies, that kind of thing. But it's, I'm not quite sure at this point, what implementation means here. I don't know, Suzanne, if you've heard anything about what that means either, but I'll definitely keep my ear to the ground to pass on anything I do here. And if in your report you can share later if you happen to know something. So I just really want to take this moment to really encourage folks to take a listen to the webinar and and at least the charts, that kind of thing, because it's really important, and it's legislated that we actually are doing this. Okay, any questions? Great. Next up is report of the board, and we'll just go around and each of our committees. And first up is communication and engagement committee, and that's Tricia. Do you have?
Tricia actually asked me to.
Okay, excellent.
Report just since she's online.
Yeah,
but,
excellent.
So yeah, our committee met last week, and we discussed. Well, I'm looking at the wrong stuff. Sorry. We discussed just some updates we had made to our the website and just kind of improving the format for people to be able to connect with us and find the right folks with their questions. But then we spent a considerable amount of time talking with Dr. Baker and Emily Blistein about kind of getting prepared for communications and engagement around the FY26 budget and what we anticipate wanting to do. So what we had decided was that we sorry, I'm getting a little flustered because I have too many papers in front of me. But we had talked about the kind kind of wanting to do similar format to what we did last year in that taking advantage of utilizing MCTV to get some word out, also connecting with the with the finance committee to talk about how to develop outreach materials and how we want to present this budget to the community, and identify a date in January where we could possibly organize like a public meeting or a couple of public meetings after the board has approved a budget, or actually, excuse me, right before the board has approved a budget, so that folks have an opportunity to kind of see where things are at, weigh in, and ask questions before we finalize it, and then do our sort of February public education about the budget. So we had talked about, we'd kicked out a date of around January 16th, kind of aiming for that mid-January time frame to hopefully fit in with the rest of the timeline, and probably set up either a public meeting like in person and or Zoom, and then develop some materials from there and kind of hit the ground running for budget education. I'm trying to think what else yeah, I think that's, I guess the other things that we talked about were just what, Dr. Baker and Emily had requested of the committee to provide some feedback on, just what are gonna be the most effective graphics for communicating how the budget is being organized, how equity-based budgeting is working for us, and just how we can kind of make it a more accessible document. So that's kind of where we're at with that.
Comment?
And question, Brian?
Heather, or yes,
Mary Heather?
yeah, Mary Heather. I'm out of it today. When I was in Shoreham, I had an opportunity to talk to a few folks there about whether they were getting information that they needed. And what I got back was, well, I said, there's the newspaper, the Addison Independent, and the response was, well, it costs something. And then I said, well, then somebody said, well, there's the newsletter that comes from the central office, or for the school, and you get that through a computer. And the problem is, at least in that town, there are a lot of people who are not making a lot of money, and they can't really take advantage of what is out there. So I don't know what can be done, but they need to be getting the information. When I had a meeting out there, and when everybody was meeting with the schools a month or so ago.
Yeah, we were there together.
Yeah, right, and remember the person who came in and said, I just found out about this an hour ago. And I think we were both falling off our chairs. I said, that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, that's just some information for you.
Okay, next up is the Facilities Committee.
Facilities Committee met on November 14th. The main thing to report out was that we finalized the capital improvement planning RFP. Should be submitted early December. Hoping to get responses back by January 10th that we would review at our January 15th Facilities Committee meeting. Questions about that?
Questions? Finance Committee.
We'll set up a schedule that there's only 3 days that we can meet before the next board
Yep.
meeting. So we'll have to warn that on Monday the 2nd.
Yep. Thanks. And then we have Policy Committee.
Yep. We are continuing to work on the policies we talked about earlier, C30 and D6, but also tonight we'd like to formally adopt, is that the right word, this E20 policy, which you've seen now 4 times. This is the second time from last time. This is the one that deals with community use of school facilities. It's way down the bottom on page 97 of your agenda. And we just encourage you to vote to adopt it.
Okay, can I have a motion? Okay, Ella,
A second.
and Ellie seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting, policy, E20 with the changes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The policy has been adopted.
Okay.
And then you'll change the warned and adopted,
Yep, I'll email Darcy
Update.
right now.
update that, because it's, that would need to indicate.
Well, okay,
Correct.
it would be, the
'Cause we-
warned date is correct. The adopted date
Would be today.
would be
Today.
today, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else that you want to report out?
That's it for now.
Okay. Negotiations, I don't think there's anything.
Nothing to report.
Okay. Addison Central CPAC update.
Can I have I have a negotiations question for Steve, I guess?
Oh, yeah.
Are we done?
Yes, we have
We're done.
formally signed
Both-
and adopted both groups, teachers and support staff.
Okay, so I'm on the negotiations committee. Are we effectively,
We are
Done.
we are in recess, but we can, like, for example, for side letters.
For
we
side-
can
be-
call
Yeah. Oh,
these
okay.
side letters,
okay,
and things of that nature. So
okay,
we're not disbanded, we're just not actively meeting.
okay, thank you.
Okay. The CPAC update, Joanna and Suzanne.
I had class that ran late, so I didn't
Okay.
get to go.
Yeah, and I went, and so did Dr. Baker. So last Wednesday, about 30 people showed up for the CPAC meeting, and I thought it was a really powerful discussion. And it was about the school to home communication, specifically for students with IEPs and 504 plans. So my understanding is that Dr. Baker reached out to the CPAC leaders asking for help problem solving the challenge of how to ensure confidentiality, particularly shared via email, and also remain supportive to families with children on IEPs and 504 plans. I believe the CPAC leaders were excited with the opportunity to collaborate with district administration, and it seemed to align with their goal of this year to be a district resource. And for me, this meeting felt particularly notable because there were sort of, it came together in a kind of a unique way. And I think it started with the initial ask coming from Dr. Baker. And it was really relevant and timely because it was what the district was grappling with in the moment. And I think the facilitation from the CPAC leadership end was really great. It was clear, inclusive, and responsive. And then lastly, which is what I hope the board can hear, is that the engagement from our district families was really active. And I felt like people were respective, but also felt safe in that in the end there was a lot of trust that I think was built. And so for being relatively last minute, a lot of good work was accomplished. So I want the board to think about maybe utilizing CPAC in this way as a resource, because we're grappling with a lot of questions. So as we set policy and make decisions, how can we use CPAC as a resource? Because it was a good example of how our district can have really meaningful family engagement. And I guess I would invite Dr. Baker, from your perspective, how the meeting landed with you and how it was useful maybe going forward.
Yeah, it was very useful. We were able to get kind of a collated sense of feedback from the evening that related to ways in which we could be thinking about communication protocols from school to home and home to school that are particularly in service to the types of communications that are important to families of students living with disabilities particularly. So we had a lot of good brainstorming ideas, and and some, surfaced some training needs, and, you know, just, it was very helpful, so I think it was a very good first run, and, that, it is the type of thing that a CPAC is designed to do. And so it was a pleasure to be there. It was especially nice to see families who felt very supported by the group, and many I think who might have even been there for the first time, you know, and so and just how freely they felt to be able to provide their perspective, and so that was nice. Nicole Carter and Tracy Harrington and Amy Pfeiffer and Julie from Mums was also there. So his last name I can see, but I'm not sure how to say it, so I don't want to say it wrong. And it was, you know, it was a good meeting overall. So we'll get Mary some feedback as to, you know, how things to think about as we move ahead, and I hope it's a resource that we can use more often.
Excellent. Any questions? Okay, an update from the Hannaford Career Center and Tricia and/or Steve, and probably Steve.
So Dr. Baker, I brought the wrong binder, so I don't know, but apparently you have been apprised of the roadshow, when the roadshow is coming, and January 15th, I want to say.
We're hoping for the first meeting in January, you know, if we can. They've been slowed by the Agency of Ed not releasing funding information for them. I hope that doesn't bode poorly for us. So, you know, they were hoping, Nicole and team were hoping to be here for our December 16th meeting to just talk about the changes in the technical center budget. But it looks like they're delayed, you know, by probably around a month.
Yeah, and full disclosure, if you have not been paying attention, we lost our business manager at the Career Center, and so a new business manager is moving in to that role in the middle of budget season, which is really puts them behind the eight ball in a big way. So yes, they do want to come and give you those numbers, but that's a long haul right now.
It is. I think Matt, you know, we'll be working with Nicole between now and then to ensure that whatever the technical center is understanding, we're able to incorporate as much as possible. So he always has a buffer around that so that we're not caught doing it, you know. So, but obviously, we're wanting to build our budget as tightly as we can. So we'll just see. This is the beginning. So. Yeah.
Next is VSBA regional update.
So VSBA is hosting a webinar on December 10th, 6 to 7:30. Yes, it's at night. It's called Get On Board, and it's a pre-candidate training for those that may want to run for school boards. So it talks about how to file to run, understanding of school board work. So part of this is going to be part of their conversation that night. They're going to have some VSBA members participating in it. The other piece is that Sue Siglowski and Flor Diaz were on a new Middlebury Community Television show hosted by former Vermont Representative and House Education Committee Chair Dave Sharp, and that they were on November 22nd, just Friday, and they got the first episode that Dave Sharp did. He had Representative Scott Beck, who was there. So they've been out. They are also got their noses to the ground, and they're talking with all the legislators coming back to Montpelier, finding out what their priorities are. I sit on their legislative committee, so we'll be probably starting up with that work in January before the session even really starts with what's coming. So yeah, and then the board quality standards, we still don't have the rubric yet from the Agency of Ed, but what a shocker there, huh? So, because they own those rubrics, and so until they release them, we don't have them. So we're still waiting.
We're still waiting for the ones the rules, right?
Well, the agency of ed owns all of them,
Yeah.
so,
Good
but
thing
right
we
now
did-
they're,
good thing
right
we
now
did
they're
wait.
doing their road tours, so, and they do release every now and then on what they're learning from their road tour, so, and those pieces are interesting, cause there's a lot of talk out there about school budgets and money, and, last report I saw said that a lot of people were, you know, which surprised people was that there were numerous people across the state that were talking about school consolidations as a way to try to get budgets in line, which I guess surprised the age of AOE. So, we'll see where it goes.
Okay. Next is Middlebury Community TV update, and I was also gonna mention there was a new educational program from the MCTV perspective that Dave Sharp's running. In fact, I did reach out to him, and he's going to be having each of the superintendents in Addison County. So I linked him and Dr. Baker together. So I think that would be a good opportunity for us as well to be able to share that with others, you know, during the budget season and that kind of thing as well. So that's exciting. Next up is Parks and Rec.
Parks and Rec has not had a meeting. Still, it seems that they are going through another sort of internal reorganization. However, we were able to locate the lease agreement for the Mary Hogan Fields, and are connecting Dr. Baker and team with the assistant town manager and team to get that process rolling. So that at least will be in motion.
Okay. Next up on our agenda is our second public comment period. And this is the time that we invite folks to make public comments again. I'm not gonna read what I read in the beginning, but that still applies. So if there is anyone from the community present in the room or attending via Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to be acknowledged by the chair and allowed to speak. Okay, Mary?
Hi, Mary Slozar. I'm starting my timer. I wanted to comment on three things that I heard you all discuss today. One is I found your discussion of the Ficus report very interesting. I have not read it, but I did. Wendy's reference to the strategies involving licensed, well-trained teachers and instructional coaches as effective strategies for improving achievements. I wanted to just highlight that it ties back, in my mind at least, to the discussion about concerns around IB. A lot of what I hear from staff members and parents about their concerns about the investment in IB is that it actually, so much of PD is going, professional development is going to IB and not towards other things. I don't know how the PD schedule is, but that is a narrative that's out there, particularly around math training is something I hear a lot about. So I just wanted to highlight that. I also heard a lot of discussion of some family engagement tonight. I heard it around the budget and also around addressing changes to policies like C30 and D6. And I wanted to congratulate and encourage the board to please engage families, and also caution you against doing it in less than a sincere way. So, or being very clear about what you're doing. So if you're actually engaging them to get their input and you actually want to hear their input, that's one thing. If you're actually just trying to communicate something that you've already decided, that's a very different thing. And there's a lot of sense that in the past in the school district, those two have been mixed, and that leads to a lack of trust. The last thing I wanted to discuss was survey research. It sounds like there's an interest in learning from people, but maybe some skepticism around surveys. And what you don't know about me is I am a survey researcher. So, and there are a difference between what has been done, like the Hanover study, that is not a good survey. That's not a scientific survey. The survey that was done for the superintendent search, that was just a feedback input survey. So, surveys can be good, particularly for informing public programs and public policies. That's the kind of research I do. It's not like a political poll, and it's not like a random Survey Monkey thing. But it does require money and investment and probably releasing an RFP, and it's the kind of thing that you guys would need to act on. But surveys can be good, you just have to plan them well. Don't worry, Steve, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to make a public comment? If so, raise your Zoom hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll move into, our executive session. So, I need a motion for us in order to move in.
I'll move us into executive session for personnel matter for 1 VSA 313A3.
Second.
Okay,
Invite Gail.
Excuse me?
Invite Gail.
You have to invite.
Gail, would you please join us?
yeah, okay. And all those in favor indicate, of moving into executive session, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we need